Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, the policy, the politics that drive Texas today. I'm your co-host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and my other co-host is Derek Cohen, our Vice President of Policy. We're here every week talking about all the things that drive Texas politics. But first, Derek, how are things going?
Can't complain. It's obviously starting to get in that busy season. We're starting to see hearings across the board, and tonight's the state of the state, so we're probably going to be hearing what the emergency items are.
And we're going to get into that for sure. I think that's on the minds of everybody. This might be the one, that everybody listens to or watches online, because I think there's going to be a really historic session this year. So this is kind of one of the big inflection points for that. But first, I just want to admit that my Super Bowl pick was wrong, that you, in fact, were correct. Patrick Mahomes did his thing. So we didn't have a bet going or anything, but at least I wanted to admit my defeat.
Well, I appreciate it. It takes a big man to admit when he knows absolutely nothing about sports, and another one to graciously take credit. All joking aside, what a great Super Bowl, though.
Yeah, right?
I thought the on-field... the on-field action was absolutely fantastic. Obviously it's going to redound to a discussion about that holding call at the end, which even the holder had copped to.
They admitted to it.
Yeah, but, the discussion is then, are we going to get to a place where, how do I want to put this? That one Ricky tick foul. I mean, there was... If that would have gone unheeded, I think that would have been justifiable as well. But, the Philadelphia fans are out there, and unfortunately, the three of them that listen to the pod are probably not going to like this. But they're out there saying, "Oh, that right there cost them the game," completely without taking into account where they were on the field, what the clock situation was, or the fact that they hadn't done anything in the second half.
Well, I think we both watched enough sports to know that it never comes down to just that one play. If they had done something else, first half or whatever. But nevertheless,
don't leave it to the refs.
Despite knowing nothing about sports, apparently, so I definitely picked the wrong one, and I feel even worse because I am at least a somewhat a fair weather Cowboys fan. So, nevertheless, all right. Well, moving on to the real issues that we want to chat about. But first, I have to do a little shameless self promotion. Again, we do really enjoy getting your feedback. If you want to hear about specific issues, we want to keep in touch with you. Derek and I are both on Twitter, fairly active out there. I'm at RealBphil on Twitter, and Derek is at Cohen at TPPF. So you can find us on Twitter. Tell us you like the show, don't like the show, or yell at us for our terrible opinions, hot takes, and bad jokes. The other thing I'll pitch is we've got a weekly newsletter that we spend a lot of time on, make sure that it's interesting and engaging for folks. It's not just, we're not just pitching a bunch of different products. We do like to spend a lot of time on it. We'd love you to share it with you. You can sign up for that weekly newsletter at texaspolicy.com/thepost. It's called The Post, and it's kind of a recap of kind of things that are going on in the world, particularly in Texas for the week. It's got some exclusive commentary, some exclusive products on there. And then the last thing that I'll pitch, which is very exciting, that we've started over the last couple of weeks, is a new video product that we call The Layout. And in that video product, we're asking members to come into the studio, to come over to TPPF, and they've got 7 minutes to essentially lay out their legislation. And so we know we're going to talk about, in the media and in various places, the top issues, property tax or, school choice or what have you. But there's a lot of really important legislation that goes really unnoticed. I mean, they do have robust debates about it, but sometimes the public doesn't catch on until the last minute. And so we're offering any member, right, left, center, Republican, Democrat, whoever, if they want to come over and talk about their bills, they come over and really, get into the nitty gritty of those details. Anyway, it's on our YouTube channel. We've got a playlist there. It's called The Layout. Again, we've got several episodes. We've already got several more episodes that we've already recorded and that we've planned. And so we think it's going to be a really interesting product, particularly for the news junkies and the political junkies that tend to watch this show. All right. So going through the show, we're obviously we're going to do in depth this time. Our one issue that we kind of go in depth is going to be a healthcare issue. This issue of price transparency and surprise billing. It's something that that people get very angry about, and so the Texas legislature is looking to do something on that issue. So we'll kind of go in depth about the ins and outs of that policy. We will talk about a few items on top topic. politics. There's a new lawsuit from the Attorney General that just popped yesterday. We'll maybe get into some presidential politics because there's some current events happening there. But of course, first for our viewers, we will get into Derek's Ledgeland update. State of the state going on tonight. Let's talk about what we think the priority is going to be.
Well, again, I think just going off of what was already said in public, that the governor is really going to elevate the need for parental empowerment in education. I think that has been one of, if not the most consistent theme of his of this term of his governorship. He has gotten out in front. He's shown great leadership on that, and we're starting to see folks in the other chambers, following suit. I think there's also going to be a lot of talk about border security. We've been dealing with this issue down at the border since even before the Biden administration. Obviously, it's gotten much worse given the lax attention that it's received during the Biden administration. But this is not a new problem. But we're expanding some of the solutions that might be brought to bear, and hopefully we'll hear some new leadership on that tonight as well. And I think another major issue is public safety. There is a lot that can be done in public safety, both in the criminal justice system and outside the criminal justice system, tangentially applying even public safety to some of the schools, which again is a whole unique subset. All that to say is I think we're actually going to see a state of the state that's focused on the issues that matter the most to Texans. We're not going to see hearing aids. We're not going to see resort fees as big as those issues loom so large in the American zeitgeist. I just don't think Governor Abbott's going to have time to address those tonight.
And we don't have the issue of right and left members standing up and applauding every 5 minutes or whatever. Right. It's really not going to happen at this event because the governor's not giving the speech at the Capitol. He's giving it down in San Marcos, I think, highlighting a business down there, maybe potentially highlighting the Texas economy and all that. But even when it's at the Capitol, it's much more of a respectful conversation or speech, and you don't have that constant back and forth. So it only lasts about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes tops. So it's totally digestible for viewers. So let's get into the issues. I mean, you mentioned kind of the top three that are there. Parent empowerment, the border, and Texans. These are the top three issues for them. I mean, we poll this stuff all the time. Clearly, border security and immigration is going to be a real issue. I'll be honest. I think the governor's been pretty aggressive in terms of like what we can legally do at the border. I'm interested to know if maybe he or his lawyers or others, have looked at to see what other steps we can take, as a state that we can legally take in order to protect the border, and really to some extent, pick a fight with the Biden administration. If they think that overstepping bounds or separation of power issues or that kind of thing, because I think we need to elevate this issue that it's very clear that the Biden administration has abdicated its responsibility there at the border as well. So, but
they did come out with an app for asylees to sign up in. So problem solved.
Great. Maybe they'll have an app for people to submit complaints about human trafficking and drug trafficking.
I'm sure it'll work as well as all the other apps they've launched.
Any issues under the radar? I mean, you mentioned public safety, but of course Uvalde and school safety is a really big issue. Half of what we spend our money on is part is schools and healthcare, right? And so healthcare. We're going to talk about that at the end of the show, but I think healthcare gets short shrift sometimes. And so I'm curious to see if healthcare issues come up, particularly affordability and accessibility. What do you think?
Well, we mentioned last week on here, really talking about the approach that the House specifically has been taking in creating a package of bills that doesn't necessarily work on expanding and tracting Medicaid or, engaging in this trench warfare that, the left and the right's been engaged in for the last, 12 plus years. What it focuses on is really saying, okay, if Medicaid exists, how do we make it the most effective government program, the most efficient government program? And for those ineligible, rather than getting more people on a broken program, what can we do to ease their access to health care? Not health coverage necessarily, but health care. And there's several ideas that have been floating out there. Our own David Ballot has championed many of them. We have a lot of strong champions both in the House and in the Senate, whether we're talking Chairman Tom Oliverson, Chairman James Frank, Stephanie Click, Lois Colcourse. The list goes on and on. There's many champions in the healthcare space. And to be honest with you, by really refining it down to these in the weeds policy discussion versus I'm pro-Obamacare, I'm an anti-Obamacare.
Right.
It's actually talking about bills that can pass and work that can be done as opposed to just things that just suck oxygen out of the room. And, another thing to point out, and hopefully we'll get to this as well, if you look at the lieutenant governor's priorities, which were also released, that which he reserved the top 30 bill numbers for, we really see a focus on affecting that which affects Texans and not so much on the symbolic arguments of years past.
Right, exactly. And I also think, just broadly, conservatives have a real opportunity to take the mantle on healthcare. I mean, it's one of those issues going back to Bill Clinton and Hillary Care and then Obama and Obamacare. It's, Republicans for whether it's a legitimate criticism or not, and I think in some ways it is a legitimate criticism, have really just been the party of no when it comes to healthcare. That they our talking points are always about, waving a magic wand and free market magic, and then everybody will get health care, and of course that's not the case. And right under our noses for the last 20 years, the left has been systematically using government to take over 1/6 of the entire economy, which is our healthcare industry. And we really had dropped the ball. I think conservatives dropped the ball on taking a forceful, aggressive, proactive stand on actual healthcare reform.
Well, when you take your ball and go home, you abandon the field of ideas. So there's really nothing that you can contribute to that debate if all you're going to be doing is putting your fingers in your ears and stomping and yelling no all the time.
So maybe we'll see something like that. I did want to, it's a good segue into the lieutenant governor's priorities as well. I did want to mention that happened on Monday, and that is another major inflection point for this legislative session. I'm sort of new to Texas legislative, session and all of that. Only been really working and looking at it for the last 5 years or so. But I think that's a really cool dynamic, is that the lieutenant governor puts out, the first 30 bills. And so this really sets the tone that these are the things that are his priorities, and the things that he's going to, put a lot of muscle into. That's a really cool dynamic. I'm sure it probably happens to some degree in other states. But what does this really say? I mean, is there anything on the list that you think we necessarily need to highlight that may come as a surprise to some people?
Well, I was about to say almost all 30 of them are worthy of discussion. But I will say, though, and the one thing I would like to point out is look at the Venn diagram between what we're going to hear tonight, or what we're likely going to hear tonight, these 30, and as well as what the Speaker of the House has said publicly and say in his inaugural address during the governor and lieutenant governor's inauguration. There is surprise. I dare say almost shocking level of overlap on some of this. Usually there's, and it's going to happen this year as well, that there's going to be some intercameral dispute about something. But I also saw both Chairman Burrows and the lieutenant governor having said on Twitter that they're already working very closely together and that they're collaborating. And that's, it's never too early for that, but the fact that it's happening at that level this early in session, I think really speaks volumes for the viability of each of these 30 items. Now SB 1, the state budget, I'm pretty sure that's going to pass. Now that's not exactly a hot take. That's not exactly but So
you're saying legislators want to spend money, is what you're saying?
Believe it or not.
Breaking news.
Not only they want to do it once, they want to do it twice, and for a supplemental one for the money that we didn't spend all of the last time.
The $30 billion, yeah. Right.
Yeah, but all that to say is, those are elements of the budget process. I will say, though, for SB 1 and SB 30, they're doing a good job of keeping the spending under control, or keeping it under the conservative Texas budget. So that deserves great praise.
And to quote the lieutenant governor, don't spend it all.
I guess this is the problem to have, right? Some of the discussions out there, especially with the scope of what the property tax relief is going to be. There's multiple methods of that. We can do the homestead exemption, which the lieutenant governor refers to in SB 3, which would raise the exemption to $70,000, basically meaning that is untouchable value of your home when it comes to the assessment of taxes. And then we also have, and SB4 then says, additional property tax relief. Now, what form that comes in, I guess we'll see. But if it's in a form of compression, we actually have it set up currently under our various spending caps that money put towards that could actually count as spending. So we are limited in how much we actually can do there by our actual statutory and constitutional spending caps. But that being said, the fact that there's two avenues and two items of focus for property,
right?
Not property tax reform, property tax relief
Cuts, yeah,
being
and that's a real and the one you mentioned is a real substantive and philosophical debate about whether or not giving people their money back would count as spending in the same way that spending on transportation or spending on education or teacher salaries or whatever. Obviously, more conservatives would consider that's not necessarily considered spending to give the people their money back. But it's really kind of I think the legislatures in some ways their hands are tied because of the technical definitions, right? About how they have to bust the caps or something. They have that debate all the time. Is that going to be something that's gonna not derail, but at least they're gonna have to work through something like that in order to get to the property tax cuts?
Oh, it's definitely going to be part of the discussion. There's no two ways about that, just because there is so much available. And again, I appreciate the lieutenant governor's reticence on spending it all, even if on property tax relief and stuff that everybody widely agrees upon. Even though there's a little bit of disagreement on the process, it's going to come up. I think you are going to see some proposals. I think that I advise caution though, because this does create a bit of a political quandary. And what do you do when you're providing, historic property tax relief, which should be lauded, but in doing so, you have voted to bust a spending cap that you've not only passed yourself, but you've really championed in the past. And obviously, like you said, it's a lot more obfuscated than just simply spending money to do that. But the way it works, though, is because it holds harmless the locals who are, we've said on this program prior, the locals are largely to blame with the profligate spending in many of these areas. So simply using state revenue to offset local drunken sailorness, we'll call it, it's a bit of a
with the usual caveat that drunken sailors spend their own money.
Yeah. Well, yes, exactly. But that creates a bit of a moral hazard, though. And so what's the incentive then for the locals to practice fiscal restraint outside of the revenue limits that they already have, with all the limitations on those limits we've already discussed?
Right. Anything else on the state of the state or the governor's or lieutenant governor's priorities that you think we need to hit? Obviously, I think that we've talked about the gender modification of children. We talked about that last time. That's now a priority issue. I mean that's how fast that issue has exploded around the country. Is that now? I admittedly was sort of a fringe issue even last session, but now it's a priority for the lieutenant governor. What does that say?
Well, I think I think that reflects the general will of Texans there. And, we don't need to go into the debate about that particular bill, because you mentioned some of the other products that we have as far as the layout. We're going to have one of those coming out here shortly, describing that particular space, highlighting the work that Drs. Oliverson and Campbell have done in this area, which has just been fantastic in terms of leadership. But this, people understand now, and I think people didn't understand last session, that this practice, especially on minors, is very problematic. When you prescribe puberty blocking hormones to a child approaching puberty, you're not just delaying the traditional pubescent development. You're dealing with a lot of other internal systems that are hit on by the endocrinology of the average teenager. And so it's one of those issues where the people that have done this for a lot longer than us, the Europeans, the British, they're all running the other way, saying we are absolutely done.
Right.
And frankly, if I know Andrew loves to say that if you're approaching a cave and there's a bunch of people running out saying don't go in there, it's almost like the red button, but you don't want to go in there.
Should be a warning. And then when you add to that issue, the issue of social media and minors and potentially putting age restrictions or parental approvals on social media, and then of course the inappropriate materials that are getting in the classrooms. I heard somebody say, which I just love, it's a great message. If you want to sum up this legislative session, we're looking at property tax cuts, empowering parents, and protecting kids. And so if you look at, I think, the lieutenant governor's list, that's a good Venn diagram for a lot of the pieces that are on there. All right, well, let's get to, because I definitely want to get to our topic in depth and talk about healthcare price transparency. It's a great issue, I think, that frankly is bipartisan, so it's not even something that has a huge left-right debate. So I want to save some time for that. But I did want to hit a couple of other issues, top topics in the news. Yesterday, the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, officially sued the Biden administration, trying to block the implementation of the recent Omnibus bill that was passed in Congress last year. The Omnibus bill is the big spending bill where, everybody throws in everything they possibly can at the end of the year. And because we're all busy, putting up our Christmas lights and opening presents, it passes Congress without much debate. Now, it turns out that a lot of the members were apparently back at their house putting up Christmas lights and opening presents on the day of the vote. And the Constitution's very clear that there must be a quorum in Congress, particularly in this case in the U.S. House. Mm-hmm. There must be a quorum in there for them to even take a vote. Mm-hmm. And that was not the case. And most of the members, I think over half of the members, voted by proxy, so to speak. And so he is challenging, and full disclosure, TPPF is on this lawsuit as well. We have filed with the Attorney General. We have filed to challenge this, to challenge the implementation of the Omnibus bill. And we won't go through the parade of horribles that's in there. But what do you think of this legal concept and challenging the quorum call, essentially, and then blocking the implementation of this massive spending bill?
Well, I think, first of all, I'd like to say that you'd figure that the party in power, back in December would be a little more cognizant of quorum counts, just given kind of the recent history that we've all experienced. But I'll say is, this is one of the things where the pretext for allowing proxy voting or allowing remote voting was COVID, which had been, even at that point, out of the White House and out of the legislature, or out of Congress, I should say, had already been declared, a thing of the past, or at the very least, acknowledgement that we're in the endemic phase, not the pandemic phase.
I mean, literally, Joe Biden said the pandemic is over, and that was like on 60 Minutes last year sometime.
Exactly. And so if that's the case, then I'm sorry, then go earn your $180,000 a year by going and doing your job. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things where I think that there's two questions here, and I think that was the question that we are asking and that the Attorney General's asking is, was this omnibus bill passed in still passed correctly under the current law? And I obviously I think that answer is no. But the bigger problem here is just the way federal budgeting's been working, specifically through Congress. That there's essentially 6 or 7 different spending bills, whether we're talking about the Farm Bill or NDA, all these things that deal with a lot of money. We have all these different processes. They all go through different committees, and we have no unified control over that. Now, the deficit spending that's been going on for decades is obviously problematic as well. But in and of itself is we are so dysfunctional when it comes to spending. Folks on the right will make a whole bunch of hay over, a $1,500 hammer or upside down toilet seat for the Air Force and stuff like that. But our own legislators that we send to transact our business don't insist on the structural reforms that we actually see that allows us to happen. Right. And so we've been outside of the congressional order. Out of the constitutional order of Congress for decades. And I mean that for decades, going at least back to the 90s on the major things and, even farther on other things as well. And I shouldn't say there's no push. There's very little efforts outside of those of certain members who are dyed-in-the-wool constitutionalists to get us back to any semblance of that.
Yeah, during this debate, I heard at least one statistic. I'm pretty sure there are usually 12 appropriations bills that fund various departments like the DOJ or veterans or Veterans Affairs and Defense and so on. I believe you're right. I think it's like 93 or 94 was the last time that we actually had separate votes on each of these appropriations bills, and they do that strategically. To your point, they do that. It's an all or nothing, right? So they load all these bills up with a bunch of stuff that most Republicans or even Democrats would oppose individually, but because they don't, they want everything to get through because they're trying to buy off votes. They do these omnibus bills, so it's an all or nothing, take it or leave it. The second thing I'll say on that is, not to get back to the dysfunction of, the Republican Party in Congress, but that's a lot of what that fight was about. Mm-hmm. At the very beginning of the year over the speaker, I know Chip Roy and others were highlighting this, Representative Roy, were highlighting this, that we're trying to get back to the structural part where we actually consider these bills individually, particularly on the spending, consider these things individually. And so for all the, food fight, and all the criticism that they received for that, this was what they were actually trying to fix. So
this is what some of them were trying to fix.
Some of them, yeah. Right, okay.
But no, I completely agree. It's really difficult to see any way forward. And I mean, if it's just red team, blue team, and that's all it's going to be, that's I can't see it fixing. But I will say, even though the kind of folks that are more strident budget hawks are more likely to vote no in that scenario. Look at it like local bonding, right? If whatever ISD wants to have a bond, they're like, wow, we're a fast growth district. We need 2 new school buildings. Like we have, kids are packed to the gills, and the ones that we have, we need to build 2 more. Let's have that discussion. Let's absolutely do it. All right. And so we're going to put that on a bond, and we're also going to put a sports center and a natatorium and a theater on there as well. And it's like, whoa.
Thought we were talking about kids in schools.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, oh, well, once we have this, I mean, that's other things we can do. It's like, yeah, but that triples the price of the bond.
Yeah.
And so the point is, if you want to take hostage,
raises your taxes 3 times as much.
Yeah. And if my general philosophy on this is don't negotiate with terrorists. And so if they want to tie those all together, then they all get a no, and they're going to have to deal with the political consequences of having overstuffed schools.
So in terms of the constitutional question, and we'll close on this. I just think it's it's obviously good policy because we're trying to defend the Constitution there, and what the plain words of the Constitution. I think it's really good politics as well because it does highlight that this is the issue. I mean, we're not just the AG and TPPF and who else is going to join this lawsuit. We're not just making the point about quorum. I mean, that's not necessarily although that is an important thing. People need to go to DC and do their job, but it also raises the question about how this happened, about the structural changes that need to happen to hold members accountable for their votes. All right. Well, we're not necessarily running out of time, but I didn't want to get to an issue that I think is really important that doesn't get highlighted enough, which is some issues of healthcare. Yes. I mean, we talked a little bit about that earlier, particularly this issue of healthcare price transparency, and this basically just means that, like every other thing that you buy, literally in every other context, the price of something before you buy it. So obviously, when you go to a restaurant or you go to the Home Depot or whatever, and you can compare prices and you can determine, sometimes just sitting there on your phone shopping around with Amazon or whatever, the quality of the item, whether or not you think it's worth that, or whatever. We shop. That's like the basics of shopping. You obviously can't do this in healthcare right now. You really can't do it hardly anywhere. And then what happens is, we have a story out of Austin. I'll just give you a quick rundown. Right when COVID started happening and people were scrambling to get COVID tests, and these pop-up clinics were happening and all of that, everybody trying to get to the clinic to find out if they had COVID. There was a story in the New York Times of all places about a couple of friends in Austin, and they went together to exactly the same place to get a COVID test. They got the COVID test. A couple of weeks later, they got a bill for it. One was $199. The other one was over $6,000 for the COVID test. Now, that's surprise billing, and that's the thing that frustrates people to no end, is that, if you're talking about procedures when you're sitting down with your doctor and they're telling you, what you need in terms of treatment and whatever, there needs to be a discussion about the cost of those things so people can have all that information and make the right decisions for them. They're not talking about emergency services. Like, nobody is talking about getting in a car wreck and having your leg amputated and saying, oh, give me let me shop on Amazon for procedures real quick. Like, nobody's talking about emergency services. We're talking about the vast majority, which is something like over 90% of treatments and procedures are non-emergency. But changing the the law, changing the process so that consumers, particularly healthcare consumers, have this information and they can compare prices. So the big question is how do you implement something like this? Like, how do you think that the insurance companies are going to fight back too hard, or what do you think the way that we push this through?
Well, to be honest with you, we already do have a decent amount of coverage for price transparency, but that notwithstanding is many of the interested market actors are just ignoring it. I saw a recent audit where I believe it was 27% of hospitals in this most recent audit are compliant with the transparency mandates. It's horrific because it simply does not allow people to be good consumers of the services that they receive. And you know what? I do understand the criticism that this gets that, oh, well, these are, you're basically cracking open private contracts with, between insurance. And it's like, and I have some sympathy for that, but that also belies the whole problem. Whereas if you can't give somebody an estimate of what, at the very least, it's going to be coming out of their pocket, that is essentially market obfuscation. And here, I don't want to go too much on a tangent here, but I heard one of the dumbest arguments that I've heard in this realm the other day. And it came from folks on our side. It came from folks, definitely more libertarian than conservative. But it came from folks where I don't understand. This is more government regulation. Compliance is going to increase cost, so on and so forth. And my head almost popped off like a Rock'em Sock'em robot, which I'm sure would cost me $6,000 at least in a copay. But I was taken aback because there was fidelity to libertarian principles just on that very first blush. Not talking about market information, not talking about transparency or anything, but it was like, okay, well, regulation is bad, therefore this is bad. Now, the problem is, if that's the case, then any form of market collusion, then it obviously is good then, right? Why don't we allow for folks to basically to get together and price fix? Why don't we allow folks to get together and basically run these different schemes where the consumer, or all this is kept from the consumer, and they're end up holding the bag in? That is not.
So to regulate, you're saying to regulate those things would be bad in that.
Well,
context.
The analysis is not even that depth.
Right,
it is regulation equals bad. This equals regulation. Ergo, this equals bad. And so it is the most simplistic view of any sort of libertarian principle, and completely ignorant of what Hayek was writing about basically informational asymmetry. And
there are still rules in a free market. That's what I mean,
absolutely.
Especially like upholding contracts and things like that. There's still rules and regulations, so to speak, even in a free market.
Yeah, it's up there with the whole, just build your own social media site. It's one of the ones where it's like, I understand the animating principle here, and I, in some ways, agree with it. But you need to have a more in-depth analysis to be taken seriously as an adult discussing these.
Also, and I've heard this from our experts all the time, that might make more sense, or it might be more of a legitimate concern if there was remotely a free market in healthcare, and there clearly is not. Obamacare, all Obamacare did was engage in a devil's bargain with the insurance companies to say, look, we're going to heavily regulate you, but the bargain will be we're going to force everyone to buy your product. Are you with me? That's that completely upended even our dysfunctional healthcare system as it was at the time, and as you've seen, healthcare costs have continued to skyrocket over the past 12 years since Obamacare was passed.
Yeah, but and I've already heard the apologetics on the Obamacare. Well, true Obamacare has never been tried, much like true communism.
True socialism has never been tried. So the other question is, and you really hit the nail on the head, is that there was some reforms done in the session last year to at least build the law that hospitals had to start to divulge their prices. To your point, a lot of them have decided just to simply ignore the law. A lot of hospitals have ignored the law, or the ones that are claimed to be compliant. You go on their websites and you look for prices, and you don't you actually see any prices. You see a bunch of links to codes that bring you to spreadsheets that nobody can read, and that supposedly is their way of being compliant. So even that 27% number is probably even lower than that if you're actually thinking about how you go and shop for plane tickets or hotel rooms or anything on Amazon. So so getting to that point, are there protections we can have for consumers? I mean,
I'm close approaching the point of wondering if there's a number, a financial number, a dollar penalty you can assess for noncompliance, where that's going to get everybody's attention equally. Because obviously not everybody in the space is equally sized. And there's some that even if you ratchet that, send that number through the roof, are still going to ignore the mandates and probably justify that, well, maybe keeping consumers in the dark. I can make more money keeping consumers in the dark about this than I would lose in non-compliance costs, right? And that very well might be the case. So my suggestion here, and I know many other suggestions would be as well, is make the penalties non-financial, make them business oriented. Not just anyone can operate in the state of Texas, but if you wish to operate in the state of Texas, you need to be in good standing with our laws dictating that practice.
One of the ideas I think is interesting is kind of taking it instead of a financial penalty. It is if a consumer asks for the cost and you don't give it to them, then when you bill them, you can't collect. And so instead of penalizing them and saying, oh, here's a fine for not doing what we told you to do, instead it's saying, well, you can't collect on the money. So it's kind of like it's still a financial incentive, but it's not necessarily a heavy-handed fine. It just says you can't take them to court and you can't sue them.
And I just can't wait to see some of the creative ideas of getting out of, from getting non-compliant with that. We're going to see, it'll be like, oh, knee replacement, much like lobster, it's market rate.
Yeah, so. Right. Yeah, exactly. Can't wait for that discussion. Or even consumers trying to whisper, hey, can I have the price? And then they, whatever. Anyway, it'd be interesting to see how they, how something like that gets implemented and not. But it's clear, without a doubt, over 90% of Texans say that there should be healthcare price transparency. I'm not really sure who the other 4 or 5% are who say that there shouldn't be transparency. Perhaps
that many people own hospitals?
Wow. Hospitals or insurance companies or what have you. But of course, it's all of our experience, right? Our experience is that no matter where you go, the price of something, which gives you that information about, do I need this? Is it the quality, is the quality worth what I'm paying for it? And then can help you structure your life and your finances around major costs like things like healthcare. So it's shocking that it's not even, even higher than 90%. Right. So anyway, with that, we're coming to a close on our another episode of The Right Idea. Derek, thank you for being here as always. Thank you. Again, if you want to get in touch with us or give us feedback or tell us, our hot takes and bad jokes are terrible, you can get us on Twitter. I'm at RealBphil, and Derek is at Derek at TPPF. As always, thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching and listening. And as we always close with, as Sam Houston said, do good and suffer the consequences.